Sarah Mitchell had always been different. While other girls her age played with dolls and dreamed of fairy tale weddings, she was dismantling old radios in her father's garage, trying to understand how the voices traveled through the air. Her small hands worked with precision that amazed even her engineer father, who watched from the doorway as his 8-year-old daughter rewired a broken television set. The Mitchell family lived in a modest house in Colorado Springs, where the shadow of military aircraft was a daily reminder of the world beyond their quiet neighborhood. Sarah's father, Robert, was a retired Air Force mechanic who had seen enough war to appreciate peace, but enough machinery to understand the beauty of precision engineering. Her mother, Linda, taught elementary school and worried constantly about her daughter's unusual interests. Sarah's childhood was marked by scraped knees from climbing communication towers and detention slips for taking apart the school's PA system during lunch breaks. Teachers didn't know what to do with a girl who could fix their computers, but refused to sit still during reading time. She was restless, always moving, always questioning, always pushing boundaries that others accepted without thought. The first real sign that Sarah was destined for something extraordinary came when she was 12. A massive storm had knocked out power across 3 counties, leaving thousands without electricity or communication. While neighbors lit candles and waited for repair crews, Sarah disappeared into her father's workshop. For 6 hours, she worked with salvage parts from old CB radios, car batteries, and antenna wire. When she emerged, she had built a makeshift communication relay that could reach the emergency services 20 miles away. Her improvised system helped coordinate rescue efforts for families trapped by flooding, and her calm voice guided lost hikers to safety through the storm. The local news ran a story about the young girl who had created a lifeline when all other systems failed. That night, as Sarah lay in bed listening to distant thunder, she made a decision that would shape the rest of her life. She wanted to be where the action was, where her skills could make a real difference, where the stakes were highest. She wanted to serve her country, and she wanted to do it in the most challenging way possible. High school was a blur of academic excellence and physical preparation. While her classmates worried about prom dates and college applications, Sarah was running 10 miles before dawn and studying advanced electronics late into the night. She joined every sports team that would challenge her physically, from cross-country running to rock climbing. Her grades were perfect, but her guidance counselor worried about her intensity. The counselor, Mrs. Henderson, called Sarah into her office during senior year. The older woman looked concerned as she reviewed Sarah's transcripts and college applications. Sarah had applied to military academies and engineering schools, but Mrs. Henderson noticed something troubling in the pattern. "Sarah, you're an exceptional student," Mrs. Henderson began carefully, "but I'm worried you're setting yourself up for disappointment. The military can be very difficult for women, especially in technical fields. Have you considered other options?" Sarah listened politely, but inside she felt a familiar fire building. Throughout her childhood, she had heard variations of this same conversation. Teachers who suggested she might prefer art class over shop class. Coaches who assumed she couldn't keep up with male athletes. Well-meaning adults who tried to steer her towards safer, more traditional paths. "Mrs. Henderson," Sarah replied quietly, "I appreciate your concern, but I know what I want. I want to serve my country, and I want to do it using my technical skills. If that means proving myself every single day, then that's what I'll do." The guidance counselor sighed and made a note in Sarah's file. She had seen determined students before, but there was something different about Sarah Mitchell. The girl had a quiet confidence that was almost unsettling, as if she knew secrets about herself that others couldn't see. Graduation day arrived with typical Colorado weather, sunny and unpredictable. Sarah stood with her classmates in cap and gown, but her mind was already focused on the challenges ahead. She had been accepted to the Naval Academy, and her plan was ambitious beyond anything her classmates could imagine. She wanted to become a Navy SEAL. The problem was obvious to everyone except Sarah. The SEALs didn't accept women. The elite Special Forces unit was exclusively male, and despite ongoing debates about military integration, that particular barrier remained firmly in place. Sarah's family and teachers assumed she would find other ways to serve, other ways to use her technical expertise in the military. They didn't understand that Sarah wasn't the type of person who accepted limitations imposed by others. If the SEALs didn't accept women, then she would change that. If the system wasn't ready for her, then she would make it ready. The impossibility of her goal only made her more determined to achieve it. The summer before leaving for the Naval Academy was spent in intense preparation. Sarah's daily routine would have exhausted most adult athletes. She woke at 4 a.m. for a 10-mile run, followed by 2 hours of swimming at the local pool. Afternoons were devoted to weight training and martial arts. Evenings meant studying military history and advanced mathematics. Her parents watched with a mixture of pride and concern as their daughter transformed herself into something that seemed almost superhuman. Sarah's body became lean and powerful, her reflexes sharp as a blade. But it was her mental toughness that truly set her apart. She approached every challenge with the same methodical intensity, breaking down complex problems into manageable pieces. The night before leaving for Annapolis, Sarah sat with her father on their back porch. The Colorado sky was brilliant with stars, and military aircraft traced lazy patterns overhead. Robert Mitchell had been quiet all evening, and Sarah could sense he wanted to say something important. "Dad, you've been staring at those planes for an hour," Sarah said gently. "What's on your mind?" Robert was quiet for a long moment, then spoke carefully. "Sarah, you know I'm proud of you. Prouder than I've ever been of anything in my life. But I'm also scared. Scared of what? Scared that you're going to break yourself trying to prove something that maybe doesn't need proving," Robert replied. "You're already extraordinary. You don't have to tear down every wall just to show that you can." Sarah considered her father's words carefully. She understood his concern, and she loved him for it. But she also knew something that he didn't quite grasp. She wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone else. She was trying to become the person she was meant to be, regardless of what systems or traditions stood in her way. "Dad, remember when I was little and you taught me how to fix that old radio?" Sarah asked. Robert smiled. "You took apart every electronic device in the house that summer." "Right. And you never told me that girls weren't supposed to understand electronics. You just handed me the tools and let me figure it out. That's who I am. I see something that's broken or incomplete, and I want to fix it. The fact that women aren't SEALs doesn't mean women can't be SEALs. It just means the system is broken." The next morning, Sarah left for the Naval Academy with 2 duffel bags and a determination that burned like a forge fire. She knew the road ahead would test every aspect of her physical, mental, and emotional strength. She knew she would face skepticism, discrimination, and obstacles that would break most people. What she didn't know was that her journey would ultimately change not just her own life, but the entire structure of America's most elite fighting forces. The girl who had once rewired a television in her father's garage was about to rewire the assumptions of military leadership across the nation. The bus ride to Annapolis was long and gave Sarah time to think about the magnitude of what she was attempting. Other passengers chatted about normal college concerns, roommates, classes, social activities. Sarah's concerns were different. She was planning a campaign to achieve something that had never been done before. She pulled out a notebook and began writing down her strategy. Physical preparation would be crucial, but it wouldn't be enough. She needed to excel academically, demonstrate leadership, and build relationships with instructors who could become advocates. Most importantly, she needed to prove that her gender was irrelevant to her ability to serve at the highest levels. As the bus crossed into Maryland and the Naval Academy came into view, Sarah felt a familiar sensation. It was the same feeling she had experienced as a child when she successfully repaired a complex piece of machinery. It was the quiet confidence that came from knowing she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The other passengers began gathering their belongings as the bus pulled into the station. Sarah remained seated for an extra moment, looking out the window at the historic buildings where she would spend the next 4 years. Somewhere beyond those buildings was her ultimate goal, a place where no woman had ever stood, where the impossible waited to be made possible. Sarah Mitchell picked up her bags and stepped off the bus into the humid Maryland air. Behind her was a childhood spent preparing for this moment. Ahead of her was a future that she would have to create from scratch, one challenge at a time. The girl who had never accepted limitations was about to face the ultimate test of her refusal to be limited by anything except her own determination. The first year at the Naval Academy nearly broke Sarah Mitchell in ways she hadn't anticipated. The physical demands were exactly what she had expected and trained for. The academic challenges were stimulating rather than overwhelming. What caught her off guard was the psychological warfare of proving herself worthy of respect in an environment that questioned her presence every single day. Plebe year began with the traditional intensity designed to weed out candidates who lacked the mental toughness for military leadership. Sarah excelled in every measurable category, but she faced an additional layer of scrutiny that her male classmates never experienced. Every mistake was magnified, every success was minimized, and every interaction carried the weight of representing all women in military service. Her roommate, Jennifer Walsh, was also exceptional, but had chosen a more traditional path toward naval aviation. Jennifer watched with growing concern as Sarah pushed herself beyond what anyone else demanded. While other midshipmen studied for 2 hours each evening, Sarah studied for 4. While others completed the required physical training, Sarah added extra sessions that left her exhausted and sometimes injured. "Sarah, you're going to burn out before you even get started," Jennifer warned one evening as she watched her roommate ice a severely bruised shoulder from martial arts training. "No one expects you to be superhuman." Sarah looked up from her advanced calculus textbook with tired but determined eyes. "That's where you're wrong, Jen. Everyone expects me to be superhuman. The question is whether I can meet those expectations long enough to change them." The conversation that would alter Sarah's trajectory came during her second year in a military history class taught by Commander David Richardson. Richardson was a former SEAL who had transitioned to academic life after a career that included operations in 3 different theaters of war. He was known for his blunt assessments and his ability to identify future leaders among the midshipmen. After a particularly intense discussion about unconventional warfare tactics, Sarah approached Richardson's desk. The classroom had emptied, leaving them alone among maps and tactical manuals that lined the walls like battle flags. "Commander, can I ask you a hypothetical question?" Sarah began carefully. Richardson looked up from his papers with interest. Sarah Mitchell had quickly established herself as one of the most analytically gifted students he had taught in 15 years. Her tactical thinking was sophisticated, and her understanding of complex military operations was intuitive. "Hypothetical questions are often the most interesting kind," Richardson replied. "Go ahead. If the SEALs were to consider accepting women, what would the primary obstacles be? Not political obstacles, but practical ones related to mission effectiveness." Richardson set down his pen and studied Sarah's face. He had suspected this conversation would come eventually, but he hadn't expected such a direct approach. Most midshipmen who harbored unrealistic ambitions approached the topic with elaborate justifications and emotional appeals. "That's a loaded question, Mitchell," he said finally. "Why do you ask?" "Because I believe the exclusion of women from special operations is based on assumptions that haven't been properly tested," Sarah replied. "I want to understand what would need to be proven to change those assumptions." For the next hour, Richardson laid out the reality of SEAL operations with brutal honesty. He described physical demands that pushed human endurance beyond normal limits. He explained team dynamics that required absolute trust and seamless cooperation under life-threatening stress. He outlined scenarios where a single weak link could result in mission failure and casualties. Sarah listened without interruption, taking careful notes and asking precise questions. She wasn't arguing, or making emotional appeals. She was gathering intelligence about a target she intended to eventually assault. Here's what I'll tell you, Mitchell, Richardson concluded. The SEALs aren't keeping women out because of prejudice, although prejudice certainly exists. They're keeping women out because their mission requires a very specific set of physical and psychological capabilities, and the assumption is that women can't meet those requirements. And if someone could prove that assumption wrong, Richardson leaned back in his chair and considered the question seriously. If someone could prove that assumption wrong through performance rather than politics, it would be impossible to ignore. But the standards couldn't be lowered, and the proof would have to be overwhelming. That evening, Sarah began developing what she privately called her infiltration strategy. She couldn't directly attempt SEAL training as a woman, but she could prepare herself to such an extraordinary degree that when opportunities arose, she would be undeniably qualified. She would become so exceptional that excluding her would be obviously counterproductive. The strategy required sacrifices that isolated her from normal academy life. While her classmates enjoyed weekend liberty and developed social relationships, Sarah spent every free moment training. She studied unconventional warfare tactics, learned languages that might be useful in special operations, and developed technical skills that exceeded anything taught in standard curricula. Her academic performance remained perfect, but her physical transformation was remarkable. By her third year, Sarah could outperform most male midshipmen in endurance events, and her marksmanship scores were consistently among the highest in academy history. She earned black belts in multiple martial arts and became fluent in Arabic and Mandarin. The breakthrough came during an advanced leadership exercise in her final year. Midshipmen were divided into teams and given complex scenarios that required tactical decision-making under simulated combat conditions. Sarah's team was assigned a hostage rescue mission that had historically resulted in failure for most groups. Within minutes of receiving the briefing, Sarah had identified flaws in the standard approach that previous teams had attempted. She proposed an unconventional strategy that utilized her technical expertise and required precise timing that most leaders wouldn't have risked. The exercise took place in a mock urban environment that replicated conditions SEALs might encounter in actual operations. Sarah's team moved with coordination that impressed even the instructors who had designed a scenario to be nearly impossible. Her tactical communications were flawless, her technical improvisation was brilliant, and her leadership under pressure was textbook perfect. When the exercise concluded, Sarah's team had achieved objectives that no previous group had accomplished. The after-action review was attended by Academy leadership and several active-duty special operations officers who had come to observe the new training methods. Admiral Patricia Sullivan, the Academy's first female superintendent, pulled Sarah aside after the briefing. Sullivan had broken barriers throughout her own career and recognized something familiar in the young midshipman's intensity. "Mitchell, that was an exceptional performance," Sullivan began. "Your tactical thinking and leadership under pressure were outstanding. What are your plans after graduation?" Sarah had prepared for this moment throughout her 4 years at the Academy. She knew that her response would either open doors or close them permanently. She chose honesty over diplomacy. "Admiral, my goal is to serve in special operations. I understand that current policies don't permit that, but I believe those policies will change. When they do, I want to be ready." Sullivan was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications of Sarah's statement. The political landscape around women in combat roles was shifting, and there were ongoing discussions about expanding opportunities. But special operations remained a significant barrier. "Mitchell, you understand that what you're proposing has never been done?" "Yes, ma'am. I also understand that many things had never been done until someone did them. The physical and psychological demands of special operations training eliminate most male candidates. The failure rate is deliberately high because the margin for error in actual operations is zero." "I understand, Admiral. I've spent 4 years preparing specifically for those demands." Sullivan made a decision that would later be remembered as pivotal in military history. She picked up her phone and made a call to a contact at Naval Special Warfare Command. The conversation was brief, but it resulted in an invitation for Sarah to observe a SEAL training evolution, not as a participant, but as an analyst studying training methodologies. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood on the beach at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, watching SEAL candidates struggle through Hell Week. The scene was exactly what she had imagined based on her research, but witnessing it firsthand was different. The physical suffering was extreme, but what struck her most was the mental component. Candidates were breaking psychologically long before their bodies gave out. She spent a week observing training evolutions and interviewing instructors about what separated successful candidates from those who quit. Her questions were so insightful that several instructors began seeking her analysis of training methods. They were curious about her perspective on improving efficiency and reducing injury rates. Master Chief Tom Harrison, the senior instructor responsible for Hell Week, found himself impressed by Sarah's understanding of the psychological dynamics at play. She had identified patterns in candidate behavior that he had observed, but never articulated clearly. "Mitchell, you've got a good eye for what makes people break," Harrison told her during a brief conversation between training evolutions. "Have you ever considered that your talents might be better used in intelligence or analysis rather than operations?" Sarah had been expecting this conversation and had her response prepared. "Master Chief, with respect, I believe my talents will be best used wherever they can contribute most to mission success. If that's intelligence work, then that's what I'll do. But I think my skills would be most valuable in direct operations." Harrison studied her carefully. He had been training SEALs for 15 years and had developed an instinct for identifying exceptional candidates. Sarah Mitchell possessed qualities that he rarely saw, even among successful male candidates. Her analytical thinking was superior, her physical preparation was obvious, and her psychological toughness seemed unshakable. More importantly, she understood something that many candidates missed. Becoming a SEAL wasn't about proving personal toughness. It was about becoming part of a system that could accomplish impossible missions. Her questions focused on team dynamics and mission effectiveness rather than individual achievement. That evening, Harrison made his own phone call to contacts at Special Operations Command. The conversation lasted over an hour and covered topics that went far beyond Sarah's qualifications. They discussed changing political realities, evolving mission requirements, and the possibility that traditional approaches to candidate selection might need updating. The result was an offer that had never been made before. Sarah would be allowed to attempt a modified version of SEAL training, not as an official candidate, but as a test case for evaluating whether women could meet the physical and psychological requirements. If she succeeded, it would provide data for future policy decisions. If she failed, it would confirm existing assumptions. Sarah's graduation from the Naval Academy was attended by family members who were proud but concerned about her chosen path. Her father, Robert, watched his daughter receive her commission as an ensign and wondered if he had somehow failed to protect her from her own ambitions. "Sarah, you don't have anything left to prove," he told her during the reception following the ceremony. "You've already accomplished more than anyone thought possible." Sarah looked at her father with the same determination he had seen in her eyes since childhood. "Dad, I'm not trying to prove anything anymore. I'm trying to become something. And I'm almost there." 2 weeks later, Ensign Sarah Mitchell reported to Naval Special Warfare Training Center for an evaluation process that would either validate 4 years of preparation or destroy everything she had worked toward. She carried the same 2 duffel bags she had brought to the academy, but now they contained equipment specifically chosen for the most challenging training in the American military. As she walked through the gates of the compound where elite warriors were forged, Sarah felt the familiar sensation of being exactly where she belonged. The impossible had become merely difficult, and she was ready to take the final step toward changing history. Hell Week began at 0430 on a Monday morning that would forever divide Sarah Mitchell's life into before and after. The Pacific Ocean was cold and unforgiving as she plunged into the surf alongside 23 male candidates, each of whom had been told that her presence was an experiment that would probably end in failure. The instructors had designed her evaluation to be identical to standard SEAL training in every measurable aspect. She would face the same physical challenges, the same sleep deprivation, the same psychological pressure that had broken thousands of candidates before her. The only difference was that she would be watched more carefully than any candidate in the program's history. Master Chief Harrison had briefed his instructor team extensively about their responsibility. They were to treat Sarah exactly like any other candidate. No special consideration, no reduced standards, no accommodation for her gender. At the same time, they were to document every aspect of her performance for analysis by senior leadership. The first test came during the initial physical screening. Candidates were required to complete a series of exercises that included a timed swim, calisthenics, and an obstacle course. Sarah had trained specifically for these requirements and knew her scores would be competitive. What she hadn't anticipated was the psychological impact of being the only woman among men who clearly resented her presence. As she prepared for the swimming portion, Sarah overheard conversations that were intended for her to hear. Several candidates made crude comments about women in combat, questioning whether she would be able to pull her weight when lives were on the line. Others suggested that she was there only for political reasons and would receive special treatment regardless of performance. Sarah had expected this reaction and had prepared mental strategies for dealing with it. She focused on her own performance and ignored everything else. When the whistle sounded for the start of the swim, she dove into the Pacific and began the methodical stroke technique that had carried her to victory in dozens of competitions. 50 minutes later, Sarah emerged from the water in third place overall, having outperformed 20 candidates who had assumed she would struggle. The beach was quiet as she ran toward the next evolution, leaving behind men who were still processing what they had witnessed. The obstacle course was designed to test functional strength and agility under time pressure. Sarah attacked each obstacle with precision that came from months of practice on similar equipment. She moved efficiently rather than forcefully, using technique to overcome challenges that other candidates try to muscle through. Her performance on the rope climb was particularly impressive. While larger candidates struggled to haul their body weight up the 30-foot rope, Sarah ascended smoothly using a technique that maximized efficiency and minimized energy expenditure. She completed the entire course in a time that would have been impressive for any candidate. By the end of the first day, Sarah had established herself as a serious contender rather than a symbolic participant. Her scores were consistently in the top tier, and her attitude was focused and professional. More importantly, she had begun to earn grudging respect from candidates who had initially dismissed her. The real test began on Tuesday morning with the start of actual Hell Week. Sleep deprivation, constant physical stress, and psychological pressure would push every candidate to their breaking point. The instructors would use every available method to identify weaknesses and exploit them until candidates either adapted or quit. Sarah's approach to Hell Week was different from most candidates in a crucial way. While others tried to endure the suffering through mental toughness alone, she treated each evolution as an engineering problem that could be solved through analysis and adaptation. When faced with impossible physical demands, she looked for ways to work smarter rather than just harder. The log PT evolution was particularly revealing. Teams of 6 candidates were required to carry 400-pound logs through various exercises designed to build teamwork and test leadership under stress. Sarah's team initially struggled because several members were focused on proving individual strength rather than working collectively. Sarah quickly identified the problem and began directing her team's efforts with quiet authority. She repositioned team members based on their individual strengths, adjusted their technique to maximize efficiency, and maintained communication that kept everyone focused on shared objectives rather than personal competition. By the end of the evolution, Sarah's team was outperforming groups that had initially seemed stronger. Her ability to optimize collective performance rather than simply contribute individual effort had transformed their effectiveness. The instructors took note of her natural leadership and tactical thinking under pressure. Wednesday brought boat operations that tested candidates' ability to function as cohesive units while exhausted and hypothermic. Teams were required to carry heavy inflatable boats over their heads while running on the beach, then paddle through surf that seemed designed to capsize anyone who lacked perfect coordination. Sarah's boat team had developed into a smooth unit under her subtle leadership. She had identified each team member's strengths and weaknesses, then organized their efforts to maximize efficiency. When other teams struggled with coordination and communication, Sarah's team moved with precision that impressed even veteran instructors. The breakthrough moment came during a night navigation exercise that required individual candidates to find specific checkpoints using only a compass and map. The course was designed to be completed by exceptional candidates in 4 hours, but most took significantly longer or failed to find all checkpoints. Sarah approached the navigation challenge with the same systematic thinking she applied to technical problems. She analyzed the course layout, identified the most efficient route sequence, and planned timing that would account for fatigue and challenging terrain. More importantly, she had demonstrated that her technical intelligence remained sharp even under extreme physical and psychological stress. Thursday morning brought rock portage, an evolution that historically eliminated more candidates than any other single challenge. Teams were required to paddle their boats through dangerous surf, land on rocky shoreline, carry the boats over treacherous terrain, then return to sea, all while fighting exhaustion and hypothermia. Sarah's team had bonded into a unit that functioned with near-telepathic coordination. They moved through the evolution with efficiency that came from trust, communication, and shared commitment to mutual success. When other teams argued and struggled, Sarah's team simply executed their tasks with quiet professionalism. The moment that would be remembered by everyone present came when another team's boat capsized in heavy surf near dangerous rocks. 2 candidates were in immediate danger of being swept into a rocky area where serious injury or death was possible. Without hesitation, Sarah dove into the water and began swimming toward the struggling candidates. Her rescue technique was textbook perfect. She approached the first candidate with confidence that comes from extensive water safety training, secured him with a technique that prevented panic-induced drowning, and guided him towards safer water. She then returned for the second candidate, who was being pulled toward the rocks by current and undertow. The second rescue was more challenging because the candidate was larger than Sarah and was fighting against her assistants in his panic. Sarah used psychological training to calm him, physical technique to control his movements, and tactical thinking to navigate them both to safety. The entire evolution took less than 4 minutes, but it demonstrated capabilities that went beyond anything measured by standard tests. Master Chief Harrison watched the rescue from shore and realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. Sarah had just demonstrated physical courage, tactical thinking, and rescue skills under conditions where failure would have resulted in serious casualties. Her performance wasn't just competitive with male candidates. It was superior to most. Friday afternoon brought the final evolution of Hell Week, a 14-mile run that would determine which candidates had the mental toughness to continue in training. Candidates who had survived everything else still faced the ultimate test of their will to succeed regardless of physical suffering. Sarah began the run with a pace that was aggressive but sustainable. She had calculated exactly what time she needed to finish in the top tier while maintaining energy reserves for the final miles when other candidates would be breaking down. Her strategy was based on 4 years of preparation for exactly this moment. At the 8-mile point, several strong candidates began falling behind the pace required for successful completion. Sarah found herself running with a small group of the most determined survivors, men who had accepted her as an equal team member rather than an outsider to be defeated. The final 6 miles tested every aspect of preparation and character that Sarah had developed throughout her life. Her legs burned, her lungs fought for oxygen in the humid air, and her mind battled against the voice that whispered about the comfort of quitting. But deeper than the pain was the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Sarah crossed the finish line in 2nd place overall, having outperformed 21 male candidates in one of the most demanding physical challenges in military training. More importantly, she had demonstrated that her gender was irrelevant to her ability to perform under conditions where lives depended on individual and team excellence. The graduation ceremony was attended by senior military leadership who had come to evaluate the experiment of female participation in SEAL training. Admiral Sullivan was present, along with representatives from Special Operations Command who would make recommendations about future policy changes. Master Chief Harrison addressed the graduating candidates with remarks that focused on teamwork, dedication, and the responsibility that came with joining an elite unit. When he reached Sarah's name on the list, his voice carried a note of respect that acknowledged something historic. "Ensign Mitchell," he said, looking directly at her, "you have proven that excellence knows no boundaries except those we place on ourselves. Your performance throughout training has been exemplary, and your dedication to team success exemplifies the values we seek in every SEAL." The room was quiet as Harrison continued. "Based on your performance and the recommendation of the instructor staff, you are hereby invited to continue with SEAL qualification training. You will be the first woman to proceed to this phase, and you will face the same standards as every candidate who has come before you." Sarah stood at attention, but inside she felt the same sensation she had experienced as a child when she successfully repaired her first radio. It was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the impossible had become merely difficult, and then the difficult had become achievable through preparation and determination. 6 months later, Petty Officer Sarah Mitchell graduated from SEAL qualification training and received her trident, the symbol that marked her as a member of the most elite fighting force in the American military. She was assigned to a team that was initially skeptical, but quickly recognized her value as both a technical specialist and a reliable team member. Her first deployment took her to the mountains of Afghanistan, where her language skills and cultural knowledge proved invaluable in operations requiring subtle intelligence gathering. Her second deployment was to maritime operations in the Pacific, where her technical expertise with communications equipment enabled missions that would have been impossible with standard capabilities. But it was her third deployment that would define her legacy beyond simply being the first woman to earn a SEAL trident. Intelligence had identified a terrorist cell operating from a compound that was heavily fortified and surrounded by civilian populations. Traditional assault methods would result in unacceptable casualties, and the time window for action was closing rapidly. Sarah proposed a plan that utilized her unique combination of technical skills and operational training. She would infiltrate the compound using electronic warfare techniques to disable security systems, gather intelligence on the terrorist operations, and plant monitoring devices that would enable long-term surveillance. The mission required her to operate alone in hostile territory for 72 hours, using skills that combined her childhood fascination with electronics and her adult training in special operations. She successfully penetrated the compound's security, gathered intelligence that led to the disruption of planned terrorist attacks, and exfiltrated without detection. The operation's success led to promotions and recognition that Sarah accepted with the same quiet professionalism she had shown throughout her career. More importantly, it opened SEAL training to other qualified women and changed military policy in ways that would benefit future generations of female service members. Years later, As a senior officer responsible for training the next generation of special operations warriors, Sarah would often think about the girl who had taken apart radios in her father's garage. That girl had grown into a woman who had taken apart assumptions about human potential and rebuilt them into something stronger and more inclusive. The photo on her office wall showed her graduation class from SEAL training, with 24 warriors who had proven that excellence could emerge from unexpected places. She was proud to be among them, but prouder still that she had opened a door that could never be closed again. Sarah Mitchell had always been different. She had grown up to be exactly what the world needed her to become. A person who refused to accept limitations that served no purpose except to maintain traditions that had outlived their usefulness. The girl who had once rewired broken televisions had rewired the definition of what was possible for women in military service. The impossible had become inevitable, one challenge at a time.